Hello and welcome to my workshop. So we're getting back on the 1968 Ford F250, and so I've blown this body apart and I'm going to do some sanding and get it ready for paint and finish details. Alright, so let's get started. There's a lot of work that goes into a body before you can spray the color. However, I find that I never can catch it all until I do spray that color. What I do is spray a light coat of color on the body and look for issues to correct. Once these are corrected and wet sanded, another light layer of color is sprayed on. It might not be the cheapest way, but it does make me feel like the truck is moving forward versus just staring at primer for another week. Some parts don't need as much care as others. The underside of the hood and the inner fenders are okay with just spraying on the color and moving on. These are never very nice in the real ones, so I guess it's more accurate to do it this way anyhow. I probably didn't need to, but I wanted to mask off the body before spraying the dark color. Sometimes colors have a tendency to bleed through, and I didn't want to take a chance. Another benefit of masking now is figuring out where the colors will transition. I have a general idea, but it's nice to have it sorted out. I was able to figure out that the lighter color needed to stop before the drip rail. If I had guessed, it would have went the other way around. The bed was close to being ready to paint, but was missing a piece that will cover up the taillights. I just made a small three-sided box with a flange to bolt in place over the LEDs. This allows me to cover up the wires while still having access for the future. The box isn't exactly scale, but I think it blends in well enough not to be noticed. You often have to make these compromises in order to have a functioning RC. To finalize the bed, I mixed up some dolphin glaze and looked for spots that needed attention. This is a two-part filler and does a really good job of filling in low spots and scratches. Many of the body lines I tried to carve into the molds. This was a new process for me, and I think it worked very well. There are instances when the body lines need to be very crisp, and carving them into the mold just wouldn't work. There is a line that runs the width of the hood. In the past, I would have done this by hand. I tried something new by adding multiple layers of tape to make a wall the scribe tool could write along. I had to be careful not to push too hard, but this gave me a much cleaner line than if I had just done it by hand. There are a number of items which need to be mounted after the truck is painted. Most of these are 3D prints. When I design them, I try to incorporate a small peg which can key into a hole drilled into the body. This allows for a firmer mechanical connection and makes sure the part ends up in the right spot. I don't normally color match screws, but there were a number that would be visible and I needed a way to get them painted. As you can imagine, just laying them on cardboard would end up with them all on the ground the second I blasted them with paint. To keep them in place, I simply drilled multiple holes in cardboard and pushed them in the hole. The vent louvers that are on many older vehicles has always been an issue for me to replicate. I've tried all kinds of methods in the past. I have cut them by hand, glued thin styrene cut from my Cricut, just pretended they were not there. These are a few of the ways I dealt with them in the past. Now I can add making a 3D printed template to cut them on the list. In general, this worked very well. The problem I had was getting the printer to create the very thin slots needed. Not only did the slots need to be thin, but the overall piece had to be thin too. The scribe tool I'm using has a shallow cutting point, so if it was too thick, I wouldn't be able to cut the lines in the body. I may be able to go a little thicker, so I will need to do some experimenting when I get a chance. I bought a wiper STL file and have scaled it up and down to make several sizes of wipers. Here I am cutting a hole and recess to accept the wipers. After I drill the hole, I use a 6mm cylindrical cutter on my rotary tool to make the recess. Just a little bit of sanding and it looks the part. Making chrome pieces is one of my favorite parts of the build. It never gets old seeing the part come alive as the shine is applied. I'm also amazed that using shiny black gives the best looking result by far. Most of my builds has the bottom painted flat black. In this case, I wanted the underneath to be the body color. Much like under the hood, there is no need to stress about it being super smooth. I have found that having a removable interior is by far the best way to get a detailed end result without going crazy painting it through a window. Here is an interior base where I am adding in shifters. Most of the builds I have seen have been automatics, even with shifters on the column. Since this is more of a fantasy build, my thought was they changed this up and went with floor shifters. Flat pieces of styrene are glued into place and the edges were filled in with CA. I don't need to be overly concerned with how this looks since it will be covered up with flocking, but I do need to have it close. When applying flocking, you normally use a specific glue designed for the flocking. In this case, I wanted to try something new. I first sprayed a light coat of color onto the floor. After this had a few minutes to dry, a very heavy coat of color was added. I then used my flocking tool to spread it over the piece. I wanted to have some seat belts for the interior. I thought about the best way to do this and decided on making the buckles and latches on my 3D printer. I then glued some dark brown hat ribbon to the pieces to represent the belt. The buckles and latches turned out perfect, and I should be able to use them on many other builds. They have that 60s, 70s vibe. So I have 3 pieces, one with the latch, one with the buckle, and one with the latch inserted into the buckle. This should give me plenty of options. With all the major pieces of interior painted, I moved to assembly. Some hand painting was required for smaller items. I don't mind this as I find it very meditative. I can get lost in the part, especially if I'm using my magnifying glasses. The radiator assembly was painted black, but I wanted it to pop and I wanted the radiator to have a more of a metallic look. When I painted the fins, black paint was visible in the cracks. This was kind of an accident, but it gives that dirty, used look. I have heard Adam Savage say that these accidents are what really push your part to the next level. I'm not sure that's always true, but in this case it worked in my favor. I used CA glue to affix the ribbon to the seatbelt hardware. It worked okay, but I need to find a better way to attach it in the future. The CA glue wicked up the ribbon and made the ends a shade darker than the rest. It's not bad enough to go and change though. I haven't messed with the old school model glues in years. I really hate the smell, but perhaps it would be a good substitute to CA glue. I may even be able to use E6000 or shoe glue. I'm just not sure how well it would hold up over time. I am extremely proud of the door panels. These were designed in 2 parts and then digitally combined. I found it easier to make the armrest separate from the panel and then move it into place. This will give me options in the future of printing one maybe with one armrest missing. The dash received a coat of black and body color before having the smaller details hand painted. These include the air units which mount under the dash. There are a number of chrome switches and a key, which were added at this point. I used the peg and hole method for this too. The tint is mostly just gray in color, but there are straps which need to be painted. I chose to paint these by hand, just a simple black color with a metal look for the buckles. This Night Customs tint is a really nice piece, and I am glad I got the file for printing. I went back and forth on how best to paint the engine. My eye kept getting drawn to the ones painted Ford blue. So I got a color off the shelf, which is close, and painted it all blue. I figured the other parts would be painted by hand. Once I have the base color, I need to hand paint the details. The valve covers are a custom mix of metallics and silvers. I want to make the engine have definition, and one of the best ways is to use different colors or sheens. The air filter came from the original engine. I wanted to go with the old school vibe, so I painted it orange and white. I'll also use the distributor and wires. Just needed to screw it in place and wire in the leads. The rest of the accessories and hoses were added on the front of the engine. I will probably come back and add some more later, but for now, what I have is good. The battery, which is bolted to the fender, has a few labels which get added. I just printed these off on a paper and then clear coated them. The grille is fully painted and ready to be installed. The last part to glue in is the lenses. These are RC 4-wheel drive Mojave lenses. I designed a 3D printed mount which keys in the lens tabs. A little E6000 is used to keep it locked into place. The letters on the hood were 3D printed. Each one was painted black and then chromed. I used some tape to make sure they were placed on a straight line. The interior is complete, but I thought it needed a little more. I have thin rubber sheet which make great rubber floor mats. They have a cool texture and once glued into place look amazing. It took a lot of effort to make, but the windshield mold turned out great. The back glass was much easier. I just needed to cut it from a flat sheet. So the door panels, mirrors, handles were all glued in place. This pretty much wraps up the interior. So I wanted the front bumper to look like an aftermarket one and the rear to look more stock. I started with a thin wall 3/4 square tubing for both. A cutoff wheel on an angle grinder removes and cuts away material so it can be bent into place for brazing. So I use MAP gas and Safety Seal 45 for brazing the joints. You want to do your best to get the joints very tight. By making successive cuts, rounded corners can be made. If you want tight corners, pie cuts can be made instead. To cap it all off, thin metal was used. It is thin enough to use aviation snips to cut out the shape. This metal has a galvanizing coating of sort, so care needs to be taken to remove all the surface material before heating it up with a torch. Once the bumpers are made, I added in legs that can be bolted on the chassis. I used 3/4 inch wide material and cut it to the shape since the bumpers don't line up perfectly with the ends of the chassis. It has been a lot of fun building this truck. I cannot wait to get this out on the trail. I have a few other projects coming up, including a replica of this truck in a patina. Until then, I'll see you in the rocks.